Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Working with Wood. This time it's not really about wood, unless sawdust counts. It's about a small project that's been hanging in the shop for 2 years already, literally, a dust boom. A simple swing arm that keeps the vacuum hose off the floor and out of the way. Before the workshop ever came together, dust collection was already part of the planning. That's why a Makita backpack vacuum went early onto the shopping list, light, portable and surprisingly good at keeping the hose untangled. When the workshop finally opened, a larger 220V Makita joined in. It also included an auto start feature meant for power tools that didn't really exist here and still barely do. It looked professional and that counted for something. The freedom of not carrying a vacuum on a shoulder strap was great, unless the hose started catching on projects and hunting for ankles. That's when the overhead dust booms seen on other maker channels began to make sense. Cleaner, tidier, safer. Some builds, like those from Spencley Design Co and Lincoln Street Woodworks, use plywood. Strong, well crafted, but swing only in one direction. Other designs use a fully articulating pivot system, clever but more complex to build. What was really needed here was an easy to build version that could swing freely left and right. Metal scaffolding tubes seemed the easiest path to achieve that. Simple, modular and ready to move freely without complex joints. So this episode follows the build of a steel dust boom. The practical, almost no math version of those wooden designs. No joinery, no glue, just hardware that tightens together and does the job. As you've seen so far, this build started by laying all the tubes out on the workbench, checking if the picture in my mind matched what was at hand. A 2000mm tube for the main arm, 12 50mm vertical section, 1000mm corner brace, and a handful of connectors. A 90-degree corner, 2 variable angle joints for the brace, 3 handrail mounts, a stop collar and a few other small tidbits. The full set of tubes and fittings came to about €100, not bad for something that still works perfectly after 2 years. That's roughly double the cost of a 15mm sheet of radiata pine plywood, and you'd only need a small part of that for Lincoln's version. But that one also needs 2 hinges and a fair bit more of joinery work, while this entire setup came together in under 3 hours, including the cyclone separator later on. Once everything lined up, it was time to start fixing things together. The assembly itself turned out simpler than expected. The tubing came pre-cut, so there was no sawing involved, just tightening the connectors in the right order. The main arm connected to the vertical tube with a 90-degree corner fitting. 2 variable angle connectors were used to mount a corner brace and support the longer span. To allow the boom to pivot, the wall sockets themselves were enough. In normal use, the tube would be locked with a set screw. Leaving that screw loose lets the tube rotate freely. One handrail wall mount was positioned just below the 90-degree corner adapter, a second below the variable angle connector. The third wall mount was added at the bottom, along with a fixed ring clamp on the vertical tube to prevent the whole assembly from being lifted up. For now it was locked in place for mounting on the wall, to be reversed later again. Each wall mount would be secured with 2 duo power plugs and M10 bolts. Nothing fancy, 6 holes drilled, 6 bolts screwed, no glue, no welding, no planning spreadsheet. The difficulty was mounting everything perfectly vertical on the wall, which really called for at least 4 hands or a few more clamps. With a bubble level clamped to the vertical tube, and more clamps to help keep everything somewhat in place, the whole locations were marked by drilling a small, shallow pilot hole. That was then used to drill the proper holes after removing the tube again. Hammering in the plugs was followed quickly by screwing in the bolts, permanently fixing the first part to the wall. Once everything was in place, it felt rock solid, but the vertical tube could still rotate freely, exactly as intended. Sometimes simplicity wins. With the vertical bar mounted, the next challenge was getting the boom arm and brace in place. Balancing the arm, aligning the connectors, holding the brace and tightening everything at once, that called for a bit more clamps, improvisation and a lot of trial and error. Eventually it all lined up and everything could be fastened out. Once fully mounted, the arm moved exactly as I wanted. Now it was time to stand back and think to myself, I love it when the plan comes together. But without the cigar. Swinging left and right felt effortless, almost too smooth. A gentle movement made it glide silently across the workshop. A firm push sent it traveling a full 180 degrees before tapping the wall and bouncing back. Which looks impressive right up until you remember that future wall repairs are also future work. Strength wasn't an issue either. The boom easily carries several meters of 32mm hose without flexing. It's not a pull-up bar, and that's fine, but for dust collection it's more than strong enough. Function over showmanship was always the point. The standard hose on any shop vac is much too short, which called for a new purchase. And knowing me, not just a hose made it into the cart. A cyclone separator had been on the wish list for a while, and it finally joined the order. For good measure, an anti-crush valve, a master slave relay and various tool connectors were added as well. All from Dust Commander, made in Europe, which was a nice bonus. This added another €250 to the expenses. With the boom finished, the next piece of the puzzle was fixing the cyclone separator to a dustbin. Here my choice fell on an Iris Oyhammer airtight transparent plastic storage box. That would make it easy to see when it was time to empty the bin, right? The hose was routed up along the boom arm and would temporarily be fixed in place by painter's tape. A 10-meter roll of Velcro is hiding somewhere, bought to tidy up that tape, but it's never around during those rare 10-second bursts of motivation to fix it up. It has turned up plenty of times, just never when actually needed. Does that happen only here? Comment lost and found if you watched this far and I'll plant a tree for each of the first 5 commenters. 2 years later, it's still holding up just fine. A paper template was provided to allow easy marking of the hole cutouts and the screws. But then again, there's also a rubber seal included, which has the same dimensions without needing to cut out the paper form. Now why would I use paper in that case? The 75mm hole for the cyclone bottom was cut with a jigsaw and filed to size after cutting a bit too far inside of the marking lines. 4 screw holes were then marked easily through the transparent lid, and after some fiddling around with a ton of different connector sizes, everything was connected. It was finally time to test the airtight box. It was tight alright, just not. The first proper working session nearly pulled the walls in, proving the hot melt seals really work. A little too good for this purpose even. Maybe an anti-crush valve would have helped if there had been one installed. Larger chips did get separated out, but trust in the long-term strength of this dustbin was a bit low. Instead of fixing that, ordering steel drums seems like the better and more fun idea. And more professional. To find the center of the drum lid, I used a 45-degree angle of my combination square. And after some more drilling and cutting, the cyclone got moved over to this drum lid. But I'll save you from that with the magic of editing. Around that time, an old Dyson bagless vacuum also joined the setup, with 2 big advantages. First, no bags to buy, ever. Second, a foot-operated power button that made life much easier during operation. The vacuum itself might be old, but it fits the system perfectly. Sometimes the solution doesn't need to be new, just to work. The last challenge to address was connecting the power tools. Even within the Makita 18-volt range, every power tool seems to have its own unique dust port size. After some digging and a few online searches, the Centec Quick Connect system looked like the best answer. The starter kit includes a 32mm hose adapter, 5 flexible rubber tool adapters in different sizes, and one fixed adapter of 53mm. This added another €50 to the total cost of this project. Altogether, the tubing, fittings, cyclone and hoses came to roughly €400. Not the cheapest corner of the shop, but one that earns its keep every single day. The system now works exactly as intended. Connect, switch on, clean cut, no drama. And all that with zero woodworking or welding and only a small amount of painter's tape. There are plenty of great designs out there, some simpler, some more elaborate. The wooden ones look great, but most don't swing quite like this. Others have clever pivots that would have felt a bit too ambitious back when this shop was just starting out. This version just happens to work, clean, easy and reliable. Sometimes you don't need clever, you just need to get it done. Not everything has to be wood or perfect. Sometimes you just build the thing that makes the work possible. And remember, keep working with wood.